Hi, I'm Sara, and this is the Amphibian Press podcast. And today with me is Kathrin Hutson, and she's a fantasy author. So thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Now, your first series, it's a dark, epic fantasy duology, and it's called Gynona's Children. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yeah, that's good.
So tell us a little bit about that. Where did your inspiration come from, and about the characters? And
Yeah, I really like this series a lot, this duology. I started writing it actually when I was in high school, my
oh wow,
sophomore year of high school, yeah. And it was the first giant project that I ever attempted. I'd finished some short stories before that, but it was 2 years of working on what became 2 separate books. At first it was one, but it was like over 200,000 words, and I had to do something about that. So
right.
I split it, yeah. But that actually, the inspiration from that came mostly through listening to Evanescence's Fallen album when I was in high school. So I spent a lot of time in the car being driven back and forth. My dad lived almost an hour away from school, and so I had my little CD Walkman and my big giant headphones, and I'd listen to that in the car. And the song on that album, Haunted, kind of started the entire basis for that story. And I've always had like a liking for really dark stuff. Just, happy ever afters are not my thing. In real life, I very much prefer them. But when I'm working with fiction, creating fiction, reading, I don't enjoy the pretty package and everything tied up nicely. So I think when I was writing these novels in the beginning, I was a teenager. I think writing Keelan's character let me get out a lot of the aggression and just kind of distaste for everything that was going on around me in my life, and being done with high school and being done with being a minor, and all the things that happen before we move out and do our own thing with adults. And I fell in love right away with how violent and wild and unstoppable she was. And, she doesn't need anybody's help and doesn't want it. And she definitely took that farther on her own as a character than I think I ever intended. I would never want to meet her in person. But she's one of my favorite characters. Yeah, it would be a little dangerous, and the heads would fly in all directions. Yeah, that's basically where that came from. And the relationships between her and the Drakens, specifically Daruk, who is her closest friend, that idea came from reading Stephen Brust and the Book of Jereg, and that whole series. Somehow being able to communicate with a dragon-like creature and also assassin in the same storyline came from that. And it was just a collection of all the things that I thought were super cool at the time.
Well, it's good that all of that made something productive, all of those feelings and all the inspiration.
Definitely. Yeah.
So why don't you give us a little snapshot of the plot? No spoilers, but
yeah, sure. Of the plot. So Keelan is the main character, and she is a Draken fledgling, which basically means that she was weaned and raised by these creatures called Drakens, who are basically dragons with political and societal hierarchy, and they are more intelligent than most other creatures in this fantasy world. And she's raised by them and has all of their instincts and memories and the power that comes with being a dragon. She doesn't have wings. She can't fly. She's in a human body, and dragons and humans hate each other. So the rest of her kind does not like her. She has these blackouts where she always wakes up covered in blood and she has no idea what happened, and she basically goes on this search to figure out what's going on with her. None of the dragons will tell her what's happening. And so she's forced to go into the human world, find the humans. Maybe they can give her answers, and gets caught up in a whole bunch of killing and conspiracies, and ends up being forced into trying to decide where she wants to put her loyalties, which side she wants to be with and fight for, which part of herself she values more in terms of the decisions she's going to make. Whatever she does is going to affect dragons or humans drastically, and it's her struggle through that, and also being a badass. There's a lot of badass traits. What was that?
You can see where those high school thoughts were coming from. Where do I go? Who do I want to be?
Right, definitely. Yeah, warring factions. Yeah. Who am I? Basically. Maybe a little less angsty. I've had quite a few readers come to me and tell me that they were super annoyed by Keelan and her wildness and indecision, and I'm like, that's the point. So keep reading, it'll get better.
I love the angsty parts of books.
Oh yeah.
I was making a joke that the romance series I'm writing, I've written all the angst down, multiple books worth of angst, but none of the fluffy stuff yet. It's I don't know how to write this.
Why mess with fluff ever? That's the hardest part.
Yeah. Now, a lot of fantasy series lately, at least in the last decade or so, have been these 12 book series, like George R. R. Martin, Robert Jordan, things like that. Mm-hmm. And you said you started out as having it just be one book and then split it into two. Mm-hmm. Are you gonna revisit this in prequels or sequels or anything like that?
Yeah, I definitely have no plans to turn this into 12 books or anything remotely along those lines. That's a lot of work, and I think the story would dry out at that point. I have thought about going back and writing, either a novella or maybe a short story, something much smaller. It's not going to be full. Something exploded.
Okay. I think it's just wind.
Oh well, that would be scary. Thoughts. I have thought about going back and writing something shorter and exploring a prequel to Keelan's story, which would be focused on Igathir, who's one of the most powerful characters ever in this world, and the human that he essentially stole and turned into a dragon fledgling, which is the only other one besides Keelan, and their relationship and their history, and going through the first human dragon, who is Giannis, and the awful things he did in betraying the dragons, and kind of what was the tipping point for him in doing that. It's brought up in Daughter of the Dragon, and it's a really cool storyline, and I'd like to rediscover that. And I've also thought about going back and doing a shorter sequel as well at the other end of the story, which would be, I'm not going to give any spoilers, so it'll be about another character who is alive at the end of Mother of the Dragon, and going into another story, possibly. Yeah, right. That's, well, yeah. It sure does. And maybe even bringing in the actual dragon gods into like as physical entities that come back afterwards. So that would be something cool. I'm focusing on a couple of other projects right now for the foreseeable future, but the gears are always turning. I may go back. Yeah.
Too many stories to actually write down.
I know. Yeah. It's impossible to get through them all. It's a good thing. If we ran out of stories, we'd be out of a job. We would have nothing to do. So.
We have to find something productive to do, which.
Yeah. Why productive when I can just make shit up?
I can sit here and play with my imagination.
Exactly.
So you sort of touched a little bit on how the Draken differ from a lot of classical dragons, but what else makes them unique? Because dragons are definitely sort of experiencing a surge of popularity right now, or at least recently. So
right. And it's funny too, like thinking about the popularity of creatures like that now, and them having come back recently, I think, into the public eye, at least people who enjoy fantasy. I wrote these books. I finished writing these books 11 years ago, so it was like, quite before a lot of these things got big now. But the main difference, at least in my mind, when I was going through this, is that these creatures are the most powerful things, above humans, there really aren't any other like mythological creatures in this world. There are different types of humans and different races that have, various histories going back in time. Some of them have even interacted with the dragon gods, but the dragons in Kenoda's children are the top of the food chain, pretty much. I mean, literally and figuratively, as it turns out. And there, so it was this juxtaposition between like that, super wild, bestial physical strength, and the fact that they're basically dragons, and set up against they have more knowledge about the world and the history of the world than anyone else, and they live forever, and they have sort of a shared consciousness. So they don't speak out loud, they communicate, I guess telepathically, for lack of a better word, but that is never used in the books. I don't ever use that word. And through colors and images, and they I guess kind of balance their rage against humans and their super strong pride, and they think very highly of themselves, and they balance all that and their physical violence with just this super rich historical culture, and the information and the histories and the stories that they share among their entire kind, and their reverence for their gods that actually do still exist, and their reverence for the artifacts that were left for them by their gods, without any spoilers also. And that was the difference in my mind there, that they were, I don't know, more like super powerful, ethereal, like wisdom ancients in beast bodies.
That's really cool. I like that twist.
Thanks. Yeah.
Definitely unique for sure.
Thanks.
So tell me a little bit about this new project that you've started, the Unclaimed.
Yes, The Unclaimed. I'm super excited about this one. This is a trilogy, it's the Unclaimed trilogy. And the first book in the series is coming out in May, on May 14th. Super excited about that, yeah. And that's called Sanctuary of Dellen. And this is this is way less violent fantasy than Daughter of the Draken and Mother of the Draken. Way less violent. If I were to describe it as what kind of fantasy it was, I mean it's high fantasy in terms of the setting and the tools and resources available to the characters, and there is quite a bit of magic eventually. It doesn't start out that way. But I have described it, talking to other people, as emo fantasy, which may not be the best description of it. But I had this idea about the main character. His name is Karen. He is a man named Karen. It's not spelled like the woman's name, Karen. And his relationship with this woman named Dellen, who is basically, well, I'm not going to give you any spoilers about this either, but I had this idea for their interaction and their relationship, and basically was like, ooh, Karen's not a bad guy. He's a decent guy. He's okay. What would happen if I just put him through all the worst situations imaginable? And I really like doing that to him. So again and again and again, just when he feels like things are starting to work out for him, everything just falls apart. Or he makes some decision thinking that it's the right thing to do, and it ruins everything. Yeah. So yeah, and he does get a little emo about it. He does a lot of internal whining and internal shaming and guilt trips until he comes into his own sort of grasping of who he wants to be with all these choices in front of him, and it takes him a while to grow a pair. But I really enjoy just pounding him in the head with all the things that should make him get to that point. And this trilogy has a lot of mysteries and prophecies, and there's a race called the Amrock, who are, for a lack of a better word, angels essentially, but this doesn't have a religious connotation at all. They're just the race in the story, and that the magic in the world is getting loose and running around and doing crazy things that it shouldn't be able to do, and creatures and races are tapping into that when they shouldn't be able to, and it's all because of a couple of mistakes centuries before that the Amarok made, and Karen's either does have to do something about it or doesn't, and that's part of the whole storyline. He's struggling between what he wants to do and what has been forced on him. I mean, that's the hero's journey, and so also somewhat forced on him, with a gun to his head. Not, there are no guns, but
with a bone arrow to his head.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited for this series, and it's really interesting to see obviously 11 years later, the difference in my writing style. Not that I haven't written anything between the two since then, but this is definitely a lot more flowy and eloquent narrative style, but that's probably because there isn't so much chopping off heads and stabbing people and leaving bodies all across the floor. So no, it's been really fun writing. I'm finishing up the second novel in the trilogy this week, actually.
Oh,
and
that's exciting.
yes, I'm almost finished and moving right on to the third and working that all together. And all three of those should be out by the beginning of fall this year. So.
Oh wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, really excited. Yeah.
Yeah, I can never write that fast. I was making a joke the other day, like I'll say like, oh, I'll get this done in a week, and then it's usually either twice that or even like 3 times that. Like
right.
I don't.
right.
I can never figure out exactly how slow I actually write.
You never know until you try to measure it or do it faster, right?
Right.
I took 2 years to write Ginona's Children, the first draft, which after, there were, I think, 14 revisions at least after the first draft. And then I have a sci-fi project that I finished, and I'm holding off on putting it out there until The Unclaimed is out, and then I can work on subsequent books in the sci-fi world, which is very cool. That one took me a year and a half maybe, and then Sanctuary of Dellen took me 7 months, and now I'm finishing its sequel in 14 weeks, and so it just keeps getting faster and faster somehow. It comes out. I mean, having a kid and also having to work and being a stay-at-home mom and everything definitely has helped me like lasso the time that I need to get writing done. If I don't do it, it's not going to get done. So I've had to prioritize it for sure.
That sort of leads nicely into my next question, which was like, what did you learn about writing and about like the craft and just, I guess, your own writing style between the two projects?
9 years worth of knowledge.
Hopefully you learned something.
Right. Let's see. Try and pull that out. All of it, probably. That's a good question. I definitely, like I said, am learning how to prioritize my writing, and I think I've been doing a pretty good job of that so far for what works for me. And I came across, let's see, I was listening to another writing and author podcast, and one of the guys on there was talking about how he just brackets like certain specific information in like while he's writing a first draft, which is basically like, instead of coming up with a character name or, a town or a river or like whatever, they'll just put it in brackets as in like character name, and then keep going and not interrupt the flow with having to like research or try and think of names that work. And that has been like, I started using that. I heard it and I was like, that is really cool. Like, why would I want to waste 20 minutes trying to look something up? So I do that, and my first drafts are just like
last name, first name.
Right. There's 2 or 3 brackets on every page. But then I go back through and find the names once the first draft is complete and everything's finished. And that has been super helpful in saving me time. That was an awesome tip that I randomly picked up. But it works really well. And, when I send whatever I'm working on to my list of alpha readers, it's like, hey, I've got the first 10 chapters, want to read it. Please ignore the brackets because those are filled in. There will be a name there. And so far, everyone has handled that pretty well. But that's been very cool. And, I have learned the extreme importance of revisions and going back through and taking a break from a project is huge. And I know I talked to a lot of other authors who are like, I just want to get it done. I want to go through it. I can't put it down. And, I've done that too. It's totally brain melting.
You hate it. You hate it at the end. I mean, you're always going to hate it at some point, but like.
Yeah. and just, yeah, it's like picking at a scab,
Mhm.
even when the scab's not there anymore. That's some really gross analogies, but it's kind of true. Yeah. So, um, so putting things down for a while is definitely important. I put Untitled Children down for 9 years. So, that helped when I came back to it and, eventually cut almost 20,000 words from the whole thing and, move things around. And it was a big, not the biggest surgery I've done on a novel, but almost. What else have I learned? Through being a fiction editor as well, which is the other half of my day job, that has helped me understand way more the mechanics of writing, big and small. The big picture, plot devices and characterization, and then the smaller, no less important things like grammar and punctuation, and how better to rearrange sentence structure to make something sound exactly like you want it to versus just kind of. So that's been super helpful too, and I love getting feedback from other people before I've decided that a project is finished. So I a lot of people read Untitled Children before it was published, and I never had anyone tell me this isn't working, or this scene is weird, or what's happening with this, or I don't like it. So there was never really like that opportunity for me to talk with someone about, like, okay, well, tell me what you think. How do you think it could be better served? Like, there was very little critical discussion about it, which was cool in one way, like, oh, I did this well, and then in the other way, I'm like, I'm not learning anything. But I did just have that happen with Sanctuary of Dellen previously. Once I finished the first draft and I sent it to a writing friend who came back and was like, hey, the ending sucked. I was very, very appreciative about that, because I also thought the ending sucked. So hearing it from someone else was great. And I don't think I've ever had a problem so far, knock on wood, with constructive criticism and people telling me what's not working, because that is the only way I'm going to learn how to improve my craft and get better at this. And I don't want it to be so perfect all the time that it's boring and I'm never going anywhere. I always want to be learning something and improving what I'm doing and finding new ways to do things successfully. So I have since changed the ending to Sanctuary of Dellen. So when it comes out in May, the ending will be great. Those are probably the main things that I learned between the projects.
I just had I just got the third of my fantasy series back from a sensitivity reader, and I tend to end things like a little abruptly.
I love that.
With series. But yeah, she came back. She's like, I think I'm missing like a whole chunk because it just ends. This is the last line. I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's too abrupt. You can't think you're missing like pages.
Right. There's got to be some kind of tie-up in the end. Yeah. It's hard in series, and or more than one book, multiple books. Like trying to, like, there's an overarching story that goes through the whole thing, but you still gotta wrap something up at the end of one book, and it's like, I don't want to. I'd rather just chop it off at the end. I like that, leaving people like, what just happened? I like that when I'm reading someone else's books, and that's what makes me like stalk an author and find out
When's the next one coming?
Yeah, when's the next one coming out, and where do you live, so I can make sure that I tell you to get it done faster. I have never stalked.
Disclaimer: don't stalk people. Stalk them on Facebook.
Thank you. I let my characters stalk them for me. That works.
So you sort of have this theme between your two books, or your two series, I should say, sorry, of these female main characters that are struggling with this sort of magical like almost mental illness, so these blackouts, amnesia, not knowing where you come from, or childlike sort of mental abilities. Where did that come from? Like, do you draw from existing illnesses in like our world, or where did that come from?
Yeah, I love that question. That's a really great question, and I don't think anyone has ever asked me that before. So, it's really cool. There's, I don't think I did it consciously in the beginning, but thinking about it, I would say I do draw from the the isolation and misinterpreted cause and effects of mental illness in our world today. And I have experienced some of that in my own life, within my family or in close friends and people that I have close and important relationships with. And I even struggled with my own stint of heroin addiction years ago. And all those things are tied together. There's a similarity there, and I think I am drawn to that place of isolation and personal darkness where no one else can follow. And that is a thing that I put a lot of my characters through. And yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said for either experiencing oneself or watching someone else that you're close to go through the huge transformations that happen, in the throes of a mental illness or addiction or both, or, serious trauma, and making your way through that. It's unfortunately a lot of people in our world in real life aren't fortunate enough to make it through that. Their hero's journey ends abruptly. And I was lucky enough to make it through mine, which is great. And I do definitely take that with me through my writing, and my characters. And, they have magic, which makes it more interesting to me.
And perhaps easier, and harder.
Yeah, in some ways they can kill people, and that's totally fine. But yeah, that's, when you asked that question, I just thought it was so cool. Like, I'd never thought about that. And I love the fact that it is obvious to someone else.
Well, I always like it when, especially in fantasy, which tends to be a little bit more focused on the world building, or at least traditional fantasy, focused on, like, look at the costumes, look at the world, look at the creatures, which is all like super fun, and I love that part too.
Right.
But I always appreciate it when the characters' mental landscapes are just as complicated as the world, but also as they are like in our world, because if I can see myself and see like all of those complicated dark thoughts that I have and other people have, it's like, oh, this is real. The suspension of disbelief is even stronger.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally am of the school of thought that suspension of disbelief comes not with like creating the most vivid and unique and complicated world and creatures and backstory and history, and like all that stuff is great and definitely adds to, it's part of the genre, but it's so easy for me to just completely disregard a character or a book or a series when the world is phenomenal and the writing is great, but this character is like a cartoon. Like, if the character doesn't act like a real person in this unreal world, none of it matters. And so I do go for extremely character-driven fiction, whether in any genre. And I like to mash it up with lots of violence and action and, some cool magic and weird things that are part of the genre themselves, Yeah.
That's awesome. What are some favorite scenes, speaking of violence, what are some favorite scenes that you've written? I mean, obviously we all love our main characters, but as far as supporting ones or whatever.
As far as supporting characters, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Favorite scenes of supporting characters.
That's always my favorite, because my all-time favorite character that I've written is not one of my main characters.
Yeah, right, and that's cool. I feel like, yeah. I mean, Keelan is one of my favorite characters ever, so she gets the spotlight, and that's cool. Favorite scenes for supporting characters. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's, okay, well, I don't want to give any spoilers about Sanctuary of Dellen, because that's coming up. There's a character in the sequel that I'm almost finished with right now, and his name is Yushin, and he's a ferryman, basically. He built his own barge to cross a river, a huge river, in a way that made most people laugh at him and turn him away, until he found someone who actually thought that his plans were viable and he could make this barge work the way he wanted it to. And the main character, Karen, comes across him and needs to book passage across the river that takes, over a week to get across. And this guy is totally crazy. He's just like insane. And he's rude and he's scatterbrained, and he like drinks a bunch and, goes into brothels, but then has this like super charming side to him that still gets him in trouble all the time. And he's insane. And but all of his insane ideas work out and make him very successful in the small niche of what he does. And Karen does not like him until they're forced to spend over a week together crossing the river on this ridiculous barge that doesn't make sense how it gets across the river the way it does. And they form this kind of weird, awkward, tense friendship where Yushin is kind of like desperate to have anybody like him. and
Please, someone be my friend.
Right. It's not really a violent scene, or relationship with them. But it's one of my favorites just because of how they're able to pull some kind of relationship and connection out of absolutely nothing, because they're forced to. And I think I've had a couple of relationships like those in my life, and they are so uncomfortable, and they are so like, I want to reject this so badly, until the point where you realize that you can't, you actually want it. Right. And I really like doing it in a super crazy way. These characters are fishing in the river for their food and catch this giant fish that, I'm not going to go into explaining a fishing scene, but a whole bunch of like weird, odd, magical things happen to Karen. That just kind of like blow his mind. He's like, what the heck is going on? And then he looks at Yushin, who has only been paying attention to like bashing this giant fish on the head with a hammer, and is completely oblivious to like all the crazy things that are happening, because all he wants to do is kill a fish. I like that character a lot. He's just simply complicated. So that's probably one of the best I can think of now, without giving spoilers to the trilogy.
Well, sounds interesting.
Oh, well, thanks.
you said that you wrote a sci-fi book that you go into more. Do you sort of stick to the sci-fi fantasy genres or branch out at all? Because I know you have some shorter pieces and other things as well. So
Yeah. I stick mostly to fantasy and sci-fi, actually only. When I write longer works, my novels are fantasy and sci-fi, and it's mostly dark fantasy and speculative sci-fi. So just barely outside the realm of right now, and current technological possibilities and scientific options. But when I write short stories, I somehow tend to go with contemporary fiction, which still sticks with the your dog looks happy.
I tried to put all the tentacles away, but clearly that didn't work.
Oh well. I'm a huge fan of writing the awkward moment and the oh this just happened in my short stories and contemporary fiction. So it's either that or stuff that's completely violent and shocking within the context of really in-depth character exploration. But for the most part, it's fantasy and sci-fi. I enjoy the sci-fi novel that I mentioned. It's I have never done as much research for anything ever as I did with that, and sci-fi begs research. You just you got to make sure that your science is right if you're going to be writing about it. But beyond that, I really like making stuff up. I like not having to fact check for stuff, in that way. So writing
easier. Well, I guess it's definitely easier, and then I'm like, well, I guess you have to make it up, but the pressure is a little different.
Yeah, definitely, it's different. I find it easier for me to make it up on my own because no one's familiar with it. No one's going to call me out on it. It's my job to connect all the dots and make it believable, which I think is awesome. And then, the other way around, you're making some stuff up, but it has to be supported by real things. And then you also have to make it believable. So that's a little harder. But yeah, two very different styles in my writing, definitely, between even those two genres. And I have to do a lot of different stuff. Change the way I write, change the way I bring in action and intrigue and stuff. Just all the different genre devices, but those are my favorites. I recently was part of a collaborative project that did that was in the steampunk genre, and I hadn't even delved into steampunk until a couple years ago when an editing client of mine brought me steampunk to edit, and I was like, this is amazing. And then I was part of this project as a writer, and that genre is super cool also. I don't know as much about it, but that is something.
It's the combo almost of fantasy and sci-fi.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and historical fiction in a weird, put together. There's still a lot of fact checking there, but there's a lot more wiggle room for sure. And I really enjoy it. So who knows? Maybe that's another genre I'll put into my plans for the future. Yeah, but yeah, that's basically where I stay.
Now, where can people find you online? You have a website, Facebook?
I have all of the above. My website is kathrinhutsonfiction.com. And that's Katrin Hutson, Hutson. My first name gets,
Put links to, so.
yeah, no, that's good. And just people misspell my first name all the time, and I want to make sure that stops right here.
I
That's,
get the
yeah. That's my website, kathrinhutsonfiction.com, and then on Facebook, it's the same thing, facebook.com/KathrinHutsonFiction. And those are mainly the places that I am. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with me. And I'm Sara Boris, and this is the Amphibian Press podcast. And I was chatting with Kathrin Hutson today.
Thank you so much, Sara. It was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.